Behind the half-closed door of Class 3A, Jack Carter, a war veteran, stood with his loyal dog Rex, witnessing a scene that shattered a father's heart. His little girl, Emily, balanced on her metal prosthetic leg and a pair of crutches, shaking as the teacher, the woman the whole town admired, pointed at her and shouted cruelly. The class burst into laughter, each sound cutting deeper than any wound Jack had carried from the battlefield. He clenched his fists. This wasn't war. It was humiliation disguised as teaching, and his little girl was its victim. If you believe no child should ever be shamed for being different, stay with this story. And if it touches your heart, subscribe so you won't miss the stories that restore our faith in kindness and the quiet power of compassion. May your day be filled with warmth and peace. The morning sun spread a soft golden hue over the valley of Silver Creek, a quiet mountain town where mist still lingered over pine roofs and gravel roads. 6 months had passed since Jack Carter had left the battlefield behind, but the silence of war followed him like a shadow. He was 42, tall and broad-shouldered, with lines of fatigue etched deep into his face. That morning, he dressed the way he always did: an olive-green field jacket, dark blue jeans, brown leather boots polished from habit, and a black baseball cap that bore the white word veteran. The world no longer called him soldier, yet he still moved like one. His wife was gone, taken by a car crash years ago. His daughter, Emily, survived the same tragedy but lost a part of herself, one leg, and yet somehow found the strength to keep walking forward. Now, with Rex, his loyal German shepherd, beside them, father and daughter had come to Silver Creek, hoping this town might offer peace. Silver Creek Elementary stood at the edge of a slope, surrounded by maple trees already turning red and gold. Jack parked the old gray pickup outside the main gate. Emily adjusted the strap of her school bag and looked up at the building with quiet apprehension. She was 8, small for her age, with light blonde hair falling to her shoulders and gray-blue eyes that always seemed to search for safety before trust. Her school uniform was simple: a cream blouse with a navy blue skirt and matching cardigan, her crutches pressed neatly under her arms, and the faint glint of metal from her prosthetic leg catching the morning light. Rex walked closely beside her, his sable coat glimmering bronze and tan under the sun, his movements steady and disciplined. Inside the office, the receptionist smiled politely, handing Jack a form. "Class 3A, she said. "Miss Martha Hale's room. She's one of our best, beloved by everyone in town." Jack thanked her, though something in the word beloved sat uneasily with him. He placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "You'll be fine," he said softly, forcing confidence into his tone. The girl nodded, eyes lowered. Together, they followed the sound of laughter and squeaking shoes down the corridor. At the end of the hallway stood room 3A. Miss Martha Hale was already there, arranging papers on her desk with careful precision. She was in her late 30s, medium height, wearing a pale gray blouse tucked into a long charcoal skirt, with a lavender silk scarf neatly tied around her neck. Her chestnut hair curled slightly at the ends, framing a composed face that looked kind from afar but revealed a sharpness up close. When she looked up, her smile was perfect, controlled. "Ah, you must be the Carters," she said in a voice practiced to charm. "Welcome to Class 3A." Jack crouched beside Emily's desk, checking that she could reach her books. "I'll be back after class, kiddo," he said. Emily nodded, holding the pencil tightly as if it were an anchor. Jack turned to leave, giving a polite nod to Miss Hale. As he stepped out, Rex hesitated, his amber eyes fixed on the woman at the front of the room. His tail stiffened, a faint growl rumbled in his chest. Jack frowned and whispered, "Easy, boy." But even as they walked down the hall, Rex glanced back, uneasy. The lesson began. At first it was routine, children writing their names, whispering about recess. Emily tried to keep her head low and her crutch quiet against the tile floor. Then came the moment that changed everything. "Emily," Miss Hale said sweetly, "why don't you stand and read the next sentence?" The room fell still. The little girl stood, balancing carefully on her prosthetic leg. Before she could begin, the teacher added, "Careful, dear. Not everyone knows how to stand as firmly as you." The words slid out like honey hiding poison. Laughter erupted. Some children snickered openly. Others covered their mouths. Emily froze, her face burning. The laughter swelled, bouncing off the walls until it felt like the whole room was laughing at her. But not everyone laughed. Near the window sat Noah, a quiet boy with tousled brown hair, and beside him, Olivia, a girl with glasses too big for her face. They exchanged a look that held no amusement, only discomfort. Noah frowned, glancing at Emily's shaking hands. Olivia whispered something to him, but neither spoke up. Their eyes followed Emily with quiet sympathy while the rest of the class turned away. They didn't know it yet, but that small act of empathy would later become the first thread in a chain of courage. Out in the hallway, Rex stiffened again, ears erect. The sound reached him, faint but sharp, the kind that meant distress. He growled low, pacing near the door. Jack, on his way back from the main office, stopped. "What is it?" he whispered. The dog's body language was unmistakable. Tension, unease, protection. Jack stepped quietly toward the door of Class 3A, his instincts kicking in like a switch flipped. Through the narrow glass window, he saw Miss Hale leaning close to Emily's desk. The teacher's mouth moved, her voice too low for him to hear, but her finger pointed sharply, almost accusingly, while Emily sat frozen, eyes wide and shoulders trembling. The other children watched silently, afraid to intervene. Jack's jaw tightened. There was no gunfire here, no smoke, but something in the air felt the same, danger in a different form. Rex's growl deepened, vibrating like a warning through the quiet hallway. The bell finally rang. Children rushed past Jack, laughing, shoving books into backpacks. Emily came out last, her eyes red but dry, her lips pressed in silence. Jack knelt, meeting her gaze. "Everything all right?" he asked softly. She nodded too quickly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm okay." He didn't believe her, but he let it pass. For now. Rex walked between them, his head turning back toward the classroom as if to make sure it was over. The drive home was silent. The pickup rattled down the dirt road, sunlight flashing through the trees. Emily stared out the window, watching the houses slide by without seeing them. Jack kept his eyes forward, his hand tightening on the steering wheel every time she flinched at a bump in the road. Rex sat in the back, his gaze steady on the girl, protective and solemn. That night, the house was still. Emily had gone to bed early, curled up beside Rex's warm body. Jack sat alone at the kitchen table, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. He opened an old notebook, the same one that had followed him through every deployment, and began to write. Something's not right at that school, he noted. Then, after a long pause, he added, "I'll protect her, no matter what this war looks like." The ink spread slightly on the worn paper, his handwriting steady but heavy with anger and love. He closed the notebook and leaned back in the chair. The light under Emily's door still glowed faintly. Rex shifted, his paws thumping softly as he guarded her room. Outside, Silver Creek slept in peace, unaware that a quiet storm had already begun in Class 3A, a battle not of guns or flags but of cruelty and silence. And somewhere in that silence, a father's promise began to take shape. A week had passed since that first uneasy morning in Silver Creek Elementary, yet the weight of it still hung in the air. Jack Carter had tried to convince himself that things would settle down, that perhaps he had misread what he saw through the door of Class 3A. But children remember what they're taught, and cruelty, once planted, grows fast. Autumn deepened, the mornings colder now, and each day began the same way. Emily walking stiffly down the hall on her crutches, her father's encouraging smile fading behind her, and Rex watching from the window of the truck, his sharp amber eyes never leaving the school doors. Inside the classroom, the whispers had become a constant hum. Every time Emily dropped a pencil, it rolled just far enough that she couldn't reach it without bending awkwardly. No one helped. Some turned away, others smirked. When she tried to ask a question, the boy behind her mimicked her voice in a cruel falsetto, and laughter followed. One morning, she unfolded her notebook and found a piece of paper stuffed between the pages. On it, scrawled in childish handwriting, were two words that burned into her chest: one-legged freak. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket, too afraid to throw it away, too ashamed to show anyone. Miss Martha Hale presided over it all with perfect poise. To the parents, she was still the beloved teacher, the woman who organized charity drives and stayed late to decorate the bulletin boards. But when the door closed and the hallway fell quiet, her sweetness hardened into ice. She would call on Emily for tasks she couldn't easily do, wiping the board, carrying a stack of books, and when the girl hesitated, Martha's sighs grew loud enough for the class to hear. "We mustn't let our weaknesses define us, Emily," she would say, every syllable polished, every smile rehearsed. The children learned quickly. They copied her tone, her gestures, even her cruelty. At recess, Emily sat alone beneath the rusted slide. The wind was sharp enough to sting, but she stayed there anyway, tracing lines in the dirt with her crutch. Across the playground, Noah and Olivia exchanged worried looks. Noah, a boy of 9 with hair the color of wet sand and eyes too serious for his age, nudged Olivia gently. She was smaller, with round glasses that kept sliding down her nose in a quiet way of speaking that people often ignored. "She's crying again," Noah whispered. Olivia hesitated, then walked over, placing half her sandwich beside Emily without saying a word. Noah joined her, pretending to tie his shoelace so no one would notice. They didn't speak, but for a few minutes, Emily wasn't alone. By the end of the week, the game had spread beyond the classroom. Children began to whisper behind her back in the cafeteria, in the hallway, even at the bus stop. Someone started leaving small drawings on her desk, stick figures with one leg crossed out. Martha never said a word about it. Once, when Emily tried to complain, the teacher smiled thinly and said, "You must learn not to take jokes so seriously." The words stung worse than the laughter. Noah and Olivia tried to help where they could, sliding her textbooks closer, cleaning her desk when the others spilled glue or crumbs on it, but their kindness made them targets too. "Pity squad," someone called them, and from then on, the three of them sat at the corner table during lunch, quiet, invisible. Each morning when Jack dropped Emily off, Rex's instincts sharpened. The moment they reached the front gate, his tail went stiff, and a low growl hummed through his throat. At first, Jack dismissed it as a dog's restlessness, but by the third morning, even he began to notice the pattern. Every time Rex looked toward the classroom windows, his ears flattened and the hair along his spine bristled. "What is it, boy?" Jack murmured, but the dog only whined, pulling gently toward the school as if trying to reach her. The veteran in Jack couldn't ignore that warning, not from a creature who had once saved lives in the field. That night, Emily pushed her food around her plate without eating. When Jack asked about school, she smiled in that small, strained way that broke his heart. "It's fine," she said, her voice flat. Later, as he tucked her into bed, he noticed a faint bruise near her wrist, shaped like fingers. She pulled her sleeve down before he could ask. "I fell," she whispered. Rex lifted his head from the floor, his gaze steady and unblinking. When Jack turned off the light, he found himself standing in the hallway long after, listening to his daughter's restless breathing. Twice that night, she woke crying, but when he rushed in, she only said she had dreamed of laughter. By the weekend, Jack's unease had hardened into suspicion. He began to arrive earlier for pickup, waiting by the fence where he could see the classroom windows. From afar, Miss Hale was every bit the model teacher, smiling, patient, waving to the parents. But through the glass, when she thought no one was watching, her expression changed. Her movements were sharp, commanding, her smile gone. Jack saw her lean close to Emily, her words quick, her tone clipped. Emily's body tensed each time. The sight made Jack's pulse tighten in his throat. He wasn't a man prone to imagination, and Rex's constant low growls only deepened the certainty forming in his gut. That evening, Jack stopped by the office to speak with her directly. Martha greeted him with that same graceful warmth, wearing a cream cardigan and a silver pin shaped like a dove. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone almost musical, "Emily is adjusting beautifully. She's a bright child, perhaps a bit sensitive, but she'll learn." Jack hesitated, studying her face. "She's been quieter lately," he said, "and I've noticed a few bruises." Martha laughed lightly, the sound hollow. "Oh, children fall. And the other students, well, they're children too. Sometimes teasing happens, but we're guiding them. You have my word." Her gaze was steady, her smile unwavering. Jack wanted to believe her, but something behind that calm voice rang false, like a note out of tune. On Monday, he tried again to shake the thought away. He watched Emily limp toward the entrance, her small figure dwarfed by the other children. As she turned to wave, Rex barked sharply from the truck, startling nearby parents. Jack hushed him, embarrassed, but the dog's eyes stayed fixed on the building. For the rest of the day, Jack found himself distracted at work, his mind replaying that sound, low, urgent, protective. He had heard that bark before, once in Afghanistan, seconds before an ambush. Rex had always known before anyone else. That memory made him grip the steering wheel tighter when he drove back to the school that afternoon. When the final bell rang, Emily was one of the last to come out again. Her uniform was rumpled, and there was a smear of chalk dust on her sleeve. She smiled faintly when she saw her father, but it didn't reach her eyes. Jack's chest tightened. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and said quietly, "You don't have to pretend with me, Em." She shook her head and whispered, "I'm okay, Daddy." The lie was gentle, but it broke him more than any truth could. As they walked to the truck, Rex pressed against Emily's side, sniffing her sleeve before licking her hand. She smiled at the dog, the only creature she trusted completely. That night, as the sky deepened over Silver Creek, Jack sat once more at the kitchen table, his notebook open. The lamplight spilled across his rough hands, the same ones that had carried men through fire and rain. He wrote slowly, every letter deliberate. Something is happening in that classroom. Then, beneath it, another line. The enemy hides behind kindness this time. He stared at the words for a long time before closing the book. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows, and Rex, lying near the door, let out a low growl that faded into the dark. By the end of October, Silver Creek had surrendered to the first breath of winter. The air was sharp and dry, carrying the faint scent of pine and wood smoke that settled over the town like memory. Frost gathered on the school windows each morning, and the playground lay silent beneath pale skies. Jack Carter had begun to dread those mornings. Emily spoke less and smiled even less. There was a hollowness in her eyes, something far older than her 8 years. When she slept, she often whimpered softly, and Rex, lying beside her bed, would lift his head at every sound, alert, protective, waiting for a danger he couldn't yet name. Inside Class 3A, the air felt heavier each day. The laughter had dulled into whispers, but the cruelty lingered like a stain that wouldn't wash away. Noah, who had always watched from the edge of things, began to notice patterns, how the teacher's voice softened when parents appeared at the door, but turned sharp and cold once they were gone. He saw how Emily flinched whenever her name was called. One morning, after hearing another quiet taunt disguised as a lesson, he made a decision that would change everything. He borrowed a small voice recorder from his older brother, a hand-sized device with a blinking red light, and hid it deep inside his backpack before leaving for school. It wasn't courage that drove him, just the sense that someone had to do something, even if no one believed a kid. The next day, Noah sat 2 desks behind Emily, pretending to draw while the recorder captured everything. Martha Hale was in one of her moods, pacing between rows of desks with her usual air of authority. She stopped beside Emily, inspecting the girl's messy handwriting. "You call this effort?" she snapped, voice low but edged with venom. "Even with one leg, you should at least try to look capable." A few students stifled laughter. Emily's face went white. She whispered an apology that barely rose above a breath. Martha leaned closer, her voice like ice. "Don't apologize. Improve." Noah's stomach turned. His hand trembled over his drawing, but he didn't look up. When recess came, he slipped into the restroom and checked the recorder. The red light still blinked. He pressed play and heard it all. The voice, the words, the cruelty no adult would believe without proof. That afternoon, Olivia saw what kindness alone couldn't fix. She was sitting near the classroom door when Martha ordered Emily to clean the chalkboard after lessons. The girl hesitated, crutch leaning awkwardly against the wall. "Use your hand," the teacher said coldly. "You still have one." Olivia froze as she watched Emily struggle to reach the upper corner, her small frame shaking from the effort. When she faltered, Martha stepped forward, gripping the girl's chin and twisting her face upward with cruel precision. "Look at me when I speak," she hissed. Emily's eyes brimmed but didn't fall. Olivia's stomach clenched. She wanted to shout, to stop it, but her voice caught in her throat. When the bell rang, she was the last to leave, standing by the door as Emily wiped her tears with trembling fingers. That evening, Olivia told Noah what she had seen. They met behind the bike rack, where the wind rattled the chain-link fence. "We can't let this keep happening," Noah said quietly, clutching his backpack. "I recorded her. We have proof now." Olivia's eyes widened behind her glasses. "Will you tell someone?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not yet. We need more. If it's just one day, they'll say I made it up." The two of them stood there for a long time, the last light fading behind the hills. For the first time, they understood that doing the right thing could feel just as frightening as staying silent. The next morning, Jack arrived earlier than usual. He parked the truck near the curb, his breath visible in the cold. Rex sat beside him, alert, tail still. Through the windshield, Jack watched the schoolyard fill with children. He could see Emily among them, quiet, small, her breath clouding the air like mist. When she turned toward the door, Rex suddenly stiffened. His ears flattened, his body coiled, and before Jack could react, he leapt from the truck, pulling the leash from Jack's hand. The dog charged toward the school entrance, barking in deep, sharp bursts that echoed across the yard. Parents turned, startled. Jack sprinted after him, calling his name. By the time he reached the doorway, Rex had pushed past two students and stood at the threshold of Class 3A, barking furiously at Miss Hale. Inside, the teacher froze mid-sentence, her smile vanishing. Emily sat at her desk, wide-eyed. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jack appeared in the doorway, grabbing Rex's collar, his heart pounding. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "He's not usually like this." But when he looked at his daughter's face, pale, frightened, with faint red marks along her neck, his apology died in his throat. Miss Hale straightened her skirt and smiled thinly. "Animals can be unpredictable," she said, voice honey-sweet again. Perhaps he sensed the commotion. No harm done. Jack forced a nod, but inside something cracked open, a realization forming in the silence between every word she spoke. That night, when he helped Emily change into her pajamas, Jack noticed the marks again, small, almost circular bruises near her collarbone. "What happened here?" he asked softly. Emily froze, then forced a laugh too weak to convince anyone. "I tripped. My crutch slipped." He stared at her, seeing the lie in her eyes. "Emily," he whispered, "you can tell me." She shook her head, tears welling. "It's nothing, Daddy. Please." Jack wanted to press, to demand the truth, but she was already trembling. He kissed her forehead instead and turned off the light. When he closed her door, he leaned against the wall outside, feeling the weight of every silence in that house. The following afternoon, the nurse at the school, Clara Bennett, began to notice things others didn't. Clara was in her early 40s, tall, with kind but sharp eyes that missed very little. She had been in charge of student health records for over a decade, and when Noah came to her office claiming a stomachache, she recognized his name immediately, her own son. But it wasn't until she noticed the bruises on Emily's file marked accidental that something inside her stirred. Later that evening, at home, while sorting through medical forms, she noticed a pattern. 5 children in the same class, all with minor injuries, all described the same way. Slipped, fell, bumped. It wasn't coincidence. She stared at the list, her jaw tightening. "Martha Hale," she whispered, tasting the name like iron. Meanwhile, Noah sat on his bedroom floor, the recorder in his lap. He replayed the file again and again, hearing the venom in the teacher's voice, the way she said, "one-legged girl," like an insult. Olivia sat cross-legged beside him, hands clasped. "We have to show someone," she said. Noah nodded slowly. "My mom," he murmured. "She'll believe us." Outside, the night was silent, but the faint sound of Rex barking in the distance carried through the air, steady, certain, as if the dog somehow knew that the truth had finally found its first breath. That same night, Jack wrote another line in his notebook. "She's hiding something, and I'm running out of patience." His handwriting shook slightly as he underlined the sentence twice. He didn't know that somewhere, across town, Noah's mother had already begun connecting the same dots. The next morning, the frost on the windows melted into clear streaks of sunlight, but inside Silver Creek Elementary, shadows still lingered, quiet, waiting, full of evidence no one could ignore for much longer. The first snow of the season drifted over Silver Creek like a whisper, soft and cold, painting the rooftops in thin sheets of white. Inside Jack Carter's small log cabin on the edge of the woods, The air was thick with silence and the smell of coffee gone cold. A single lamp burned on the wooden table, its light reflecting off the open notebook before him, pages filled with notes, sketches, and fragments of suspicion. On the other side of the room sat Clara Bennett, the school nurse, her coat still dusted with snow. She had brought the truth with her, files, papers, and a face that no longer carried doubt. Beside her, Noah and Olivia huddled close, their hands fidgeting in their laps. Noah's recorder lay on the table like a tiny weapon waiting to be unsheathed. Jack leaned forward, the firelight catching the silver chain around his neck. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded, her expression firm. 5 children, she said, all in the same class, all with injuries that don't match their explanations. She opened one folder, revealing photos of faint bruises, doctor's notes, and identical phrases. Slipped, fell, accident. Jack's jaw tightened. Across from him, Emily sat curled on the couch, her crutches leaning against the armrest, Rex lying at her feet. The dog's ears twitched at every sound, as though he too sensed that something dangerous was about to unfold. Noah glanced at his mother, then reached into his backpack. "I recorded her," he said, his voice small but steady. He placed the recorder on the table, pressing play. The room filled with static, then with the unmistakable voice of Martha Hale, sharp, cold, and dripping with disdain. "You think the world will pity you forever, Emily? No one pities a crippled girl forever. You'll have to learn that." The words hung in the air like a blade. Jack's hands clenched into fists. Clara's face went pale. Olivia covered her mouth, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Even Rex let out a low growl that rolled through the room like thunder. When the recording ended, the silence was unbearable. Jack stood pacing near the window, his breath fogging the glass. "We can't just sit on this," he said finally. "If we let her keep teaching, she'll break more than bones." Clara nodded. "We'll go to the school board," she said, "but we need to be prepared. Martha has friends, people who think she's untouchable." Jack turned back, his eyes fierce. "Then we make her touchable." He placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "You did the right thing, son. It takes guts to stand up when no one else will." The boy looked down, cheeks flushing, but the faintest smile appeared on his face. 2 days later, a small meeting was arranged in the town's community hall. The board members sat behind a long table, 5 adults in formal suits, faces carved in neutrality. Martha Hale stood across from them, immaculate as ever, her hair perfectly styled, her lavender scarf neatly folded around her neck. "These are serious accusations," said the chairman, a man named Peter Lang, adjusting his glasses. "Do you deny them, Miss Hale?" Martha's smile didn't waver. "Of course," she said smoothly. "It's a misunderstanding. My methods are strict but effective. Some children need discipline, not indulgence. I never meant harm." Her voice carried the same calm assurance that had deceived everyone for years. Clara rose first, placing a stack of folders on the table. "These are medical reports," she said evenly. 5 students, all from Class 3A. All reported injuries within 3 months. Coincidence doesn't stretch that far. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Martha's expression didn't flicker, but her hands tightened slightly around the edge of the table. Then Noah stepped forward, small in his oversized jacket, clutching the recorder like a truth he could barely hold. "Please listen," he said softly, and pressed play. The room filled again with Martha's voice, clear, cruel, impossible to misinterpret. "No one pities a cripple forever." The words echoed off the walls, stripping away every layer of her pretense. Martha's smile cracked for the first time. "That could be edited," she said sharply. "Taken out of context. Children lie." But her voice had lost its poise, replaced by a tremor of panic. Clara stepped forward again. "If they lie, why do their bruises match? Why does every file say the same thing?" Jack's voice cut through hers, calm but heavy. "My daughter came home with bruises on her neck," he said. "She told me she fell. But children lie when they're afraid." The room fell silent again. Even the chairman looked shaken now. Then Jack pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, flipping to a page creased from use. "I wrote this down the night she stopped smiling," he said quietly. He began to read, his voice thick but steady. "Ba oi o lop kon fayam lang moi jochien." "Daddy, at school I have to stay silent if I want to be safe." His eyes lifted to meet theirs. That's what silence costs. Martha took a step back, her face pale. For a moment she looked less like a teacher and more like someone exposed to her own reflection for the first time. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Martha Hale was suspended indefinitely pending further investigation. She didn't speak as she gathered her things, but the fury in her eyes was unmistakable, a bitterness born from the loss of control. As she passed Jack on her way out, he met her gaze without flinching. "You don't scare her anymore," he said softly. "And that's what scares you." She said nothing, only turned and walked out into the snow. Afterward, the board members dispersed in uneasy silence. The small group remained, Jack, Clara, Noah, and Olivia, standing together beneath the flickering lights. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. Clara exhaled slowly, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. "It's over," she whispered. Jack looked toward the window, where snowflakes fell against the dark glass. "No," he said. "It's just the beginning of healing." He looked down at Emily, who had been waiting quietly by the door. She smiled faintly, her hand resting on Rex's back. The dog wagged his tail once, as if he too understood that the war they'd fought had finally been seen. That night, back at the cabin, the lamp still burned on the table. Jack opened his notebook one last time and wrote, "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the voices of children brave enough to tell the truth." He closed it slowly and watched the snow fall through the window. Rex lay by the fire, his steady breathing filling the quiet. Outside, Silver Creek slept under a soft white sky, unaware that in one small classroom, a storm of cruelty had finally met its end. A month had passed since the day the truth came to light. The first snow had melted, leaving behind glistening puddles that mirrored the pale winter sun. Silver Creek Elementary stood quieter now, almost humbled by what had happened within its walls. The town had changed in small, quiet ways. Parents talked more softly to their children, teachers listened more carefully, and the laughter that echoed through the schoolyard no longer carried cruelty. For Emily Carter, every morning still carried a hint of fear, but it was no longer the kind that froze her. It was the kind that slowly learned to let go. Class 3A looked different now. The posters were new, the air felt lighter, and at the front of the room stood Mr. Turner, the new teacher. He was in his mid-40s, tall but gentle-looking, with soft gray hair and eyes that smiled before his mouth did. He wore sweaters instead of suits, and his sleeves were always rolled up, as though he believed teaching required both heart and hands. On his first day, he placed a small wooden sign above the board. The letters were hand-carved, uneven, but full of care. "No one left behind." When Emily read it, she felt something stir inside her chest, a warmth that had been buried for too long. For the first time in months, she smiled. Mr. Turner believed in listening more than speaking. He began each class by asking the children to share one good thing that had happened that week. Some talked about snowball fights, others about baking cookies with their parents. When it was Emily's turn, she hesitated, but Mr. Turner waited patiently, never rushing her. "Rex chased the mailman again," she said finally, and the class laughed, not cruelly but kindly. Even laughter, she realized, could sound different when it wasn't meant to wound. Mr. Turner nodded with a grin. "That's one brave mailman," he said, and the whole class laughed again, warm and easy. Noah and Olivia had become her closest friends. The three of them worked together on every project, sitting at the same table by the window. One afternoon, Mr. Turner announced a group assignment: build something that represents fairness. The room buzzed with chatter, but the three of them exchanged a knowing glance. By the end of the week, they had built a miniature classroom from cardboard and clay, where every desk was the same height, every seat faced the front, and a tiny figure stood beside another smaller one, holding out a hand to help. When they presented it, Mr. Turner's eyes softened. "Beautiful," he said quietly. "That's what school should be." The rest of the class applauded, and Emily's cheeks flushed pink, not from shame this time, but from pride. The following week brought an unexpected assembly. The principal, Mrs. Langford, stood on stage with a small golden plaque in her hands. The students whispered curiously as Jack Carter entered the hall, holding Rex on a leash. The dog trotted proudly, his coat brushed and his eyes bright. "Today," Mrs. Langford announced. "We honor a guardian who reminded us all what loyalty and courage mean." She lifted the plaque, engraved with the words, "Guardian Dog of Silver Creek." The applause that followed was thunderous. Rex tilted his head as if puzzled by the noise, but Emily laughed, clapping with both hands. Jack's eyes glistened as he knelt beside his old companion, scratching behind his ear. "You earned it, boy," he whispered. After the ceremony, Jack was invited to say a few words. He stood before the students, his olive field jacket buttoned against the chill, the dog tag around his neck catching the light. "Heroes don't always wear uniforms," he said, his voice steady but low. "Sometimes they sit quietly at the back of a classroom. Sometimes they speak up when others stay silent. And sometimes," he glanced down at Rex, "they walk on 4 legs." The children giggled softly, but his tone stayed solemn. "A hero is anyone who chooses kindness when it's easier to look away. Remember that." His words settled over the room like the hush before snowfall. As the days passed, the scars left behind began to fade, replaced by small acts of care. Noah began helping other classmates who struggled with reading. Olivia volunteered in the library after school. Emily, once silent, now raised her hand during lessons. There were still moments when she hesitated, when the ghosts of old laughter tugged at her, but she no longer felt alone. Sometimes she would glance at the sign above the board, "No one left behind," and draw strength from it. Mr. Turner often caught her looking and would simply nod as if to say he understood. On a crisp Friday afternoon, the first hints of spring touched the wind. The children were packing up when Mr. Turner stopped by Emily's desk. "You've shown great courage this semester," he said gently. "The class sees you differently now, not because of what happened, but because of who you are." He placed a small badge on her notebook, a tiny paper star cut by hand. "Next week," he added with a smile, "you'll be our class monitor." Emily blinked, surprised. "Me?" He nodded. "You've already been one in spirit. Now it's just official." She beamed, the kind of smile that lights a room from within. That evening, the Carter home glowed with the warmth of the fireplace. The scent of stew filled the air, and Rex lay by the hearth, his head resting on Emily's lap. She stroked his fur absently, her prosthetic leg gleaming faintly in the firelight. "Dad," she said softly. Jack looked up from the table where he was polishing his boots. "Yeah, sweetheart." She grinned. "They picked me to be class leader." For a moment, he just stared at her, then smiled, slow and proud. "I knew they'd see what I've seen all along." He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "You earned it." Outside, the snow began again, gentle and soundless. Jack sat back, watching his daughter laugh as Rex nudged her hand for another pat. The silver of her leg caught the glow of the fire, no longer a reminder of loss but a mark of strength. "You know, Rex," Jack said quietly, smiling at the dog, "she's the bravest soldier I ever served with." Emily laughed, rolling her eyes, but leaned forward to hug him anyway. The warmth of their embrace filled the small cabin. For the first time in a long while, peace didn't feel like something they were searching for. It felt like home. And as night settled over Silver Creek, a soft light spilled from the cabin window, glowing against the snow. It was the kind of light born not from fire, but from the quiet grace of people who had suffered, fought, and chosen kindness anyway. In that light, every wound healed a little, every silence broke, and one family, bound by love, courage, and a dog who never stopped believing, finally found their way back to hope. In a world where cruelty can hide behind smiles and silence can wound deeper than words, kindness becomes the quietest form of courage. This story reminds us that compassion doesn't always roar. It often whispers through the actions of ordinary people who choose to do what is right, even when no one is watching. The true heroes are not those who seek recognition, but those who heal others through patience, empathy, and sacrifice. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story made you feel. Subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next story about courage, love, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your home, and fill your heart with peace.